We all experience pain throughout our lives, but few can use this pain as a catalyst for creativity and to portray the splendour of our world. Vincent van Gogh was an artistic enigma and one of those rare beings who was able to channel the pain of his tormented life into a form of wondrous beauty understood by all. With the paintbrush acting as an instrument of his heart, Van Gogh used colour masterfully to depict not just what he saw, but what he felt. His paintings constituted a window into his soul. Yet this is a man who meandered across Europe's landscapes, believing that he didn't belong to the world which he depicted so magnificently, struggling to understand what purpose his life served. This letter gives us an intimate look into Van Gogh's mind and the pattern of thinking that would destabilize and ultimately end his life. Van Gogh persistently wrestled to find his place in the world and challenged the formulaic life path others attempted to thrust upon him. Despite spells as a schoolteacher and religious preacher, the only place he could ever find solace was behind a canvas. But in choosing the untrodden path, however, he invited a life of solitude and painful loneliness in which he would struggle for his sanity, dedicating his life to art. As he himself put it, he lost his mind in the process. Such was his mental downfall that Van Gogh was considered by some who knew him to be possessed and even demonic. He himself began to believe this and retreated into his own world. It is now thought that he suffered from epileptic seizures, something which could not be treated at the time. This letter was written by Van Gogh to his brother Theo in June 1880, after a break in contact which endured almost a year. In it, Van Gogh attempts to combat his family's perception of him as a failure and details the mental prison in which he finds himself. My dear Theo, it's with some reluctance that I write to you, not having done so for so long. Up to a certain point you've become a stranger to me, and I too, one to you, perhaps more than you think. Without wishing to, I've more or less become some sort of impossible and suspect character in the family. In any event, somebody who isn't trusted. So how, then, could I be useful to anybody in any way? That's why, first of all, so I'm inclined to believe, it is beneficial and the best and most reasonable position to take for me to go away and to remain at a proper distance as if I didn't exist. Later in the letter, Van Gogh gives us a peek into how his creativity flows from his pain. Instead of giving way to despair, he writes, I took the way of active melancholy, as long as I had strength for activity, or in other words, I preferred the melancholy that hopes and aspires and searches to the one that despairs, mournful and stagnant. On the road that I'm on, I must continue. If I do nothing, if I don't study, if I don't keep on trying, then I'm lost. Speaking of his heart-wrenching feelings of neglect and emotional isolation from the world, Van Gogh employs a powerful metaphor. My torment is none other than this. What could I be good for? Couldn't I serve and be useful in some way? How could I come to know more thoroughly and go more deeply into this subject or that? Do you see? It continually torments me. And then you feel a prisoner in penury, excluded from participating in this work or that, and such necessary things are beyond your reach. Because of that, you're not without melancholy, and you feel emptiness where there could be friendship and high and serious affections. Someone has a great fire in his soul, and nobody ever comes to warm themselves at it. In the springtime, a bird in a cage knows very well that there's something he'd be good for. He feels very clearly that there's something to be done, but he can't do it. What it is, he can't clearly remember, and he has vague ideas and says to himself, the others are building their nests and making their little ones and raising the brood, and he bangs his head against the bars of the cage, and then the cage stays there and the bird is mad with suffering. An idle man like that resembles an idle bird like that. And then, in a plea for affection, Van Gogh indicates what helps alleviate the pain. What makes the prison disappear is every deep, serious attachment. To be friends, to be brothers, to love. That opens the prison through a most powerful spell. But he who doesn't have that remains in death. Vincent van Gogh wanted nothing more than to be understood and recognised. Feeling trapped inside a prison of his own thoughts, he struggled to work out the seemingly intractable puzzle of what his life was about. Yet the most tragic part of this story is that no one arrived with the keys to free him. To the contrary, after writing this letter, Van Gogh's mental state deteriorated and his hope for a way out of the prison melted away, despite him producing some of the greatest works of art. In much the same way that Van Gogh saw beauty where others saw nothing, the world saw nothing where there was Van Gogh, yet he was one of the truest and most beautiful souls of them all. Till his very last days, Van Gogh would continue to think of himself as a failure. When the world finally listened, he wasn't here to see it. Perhaps he wasn't meant to, for the genius of Van Gogh came from the fact that while he was in the world, he was never of it. Vincent van Gogh with a letter for the ages.